Hello, everybody. So I know there is some lunch coming in and out, and so thank you all for joining us. The four of us are very capable of multitasking and tuning you out if you need to come in and out. I'm Rachel Walvers. I work for CDI as well as Case Western Reserve University School of Law, and that is the hat I'm currently wearing today to talk about this topic with all of you. I know these three very well, but I will actually read their bios so I don't, because I mess up Katie's every time. So Ronaldo here at the end, he's the director of the Institute of Technology and Society in Rio de Janeiro. Additionally, he is a member of Meta's oversight board, which looks at user appeals from Facebook, Instagram, and now Threads regarding the company's content moderation decisions. Next, we have Katie Harbeth, who is the Chief Global Affairs Officer at Duco Experts. She recently joined there after over a decade at Meta, where she was instrumental in shaping the company's election policy. She started her own media empire, and that is the phrase I used and not Katie, called Anchor Change, where she talks about trust and safety issues under the tagline, Panic Responsibly, which I think every single panel today could be focused on panicking responsibly around AI. And then next I have Alyssa Starzak, who is the Vice President and Global Head of Public Policy at Cloudflare, where she leads the company's policies related to trust and safety decisions. So I actually wanted to start with a little bit of a level setting because one of our lovely staff members, who's not in the room because he's running around, I asked him to help me write a description of this panel, and he said, we trust AI when it is safe. And I'm like, that's not what the point of this panel is about. Trust and safety is its own unique industry. But I have been shocked at, even though trust and safety uses so much AI, how little the conversations seem to overlap. That we're having an AI conversation over here and a trust and safety conversation over there. And so this panel and what we're talking about today is really what is the intersection and how do those meet? So I'm actually gonna turn it over to Katie to give us just a little bit of background on the trust and safety industry and what we mean when I say AI and trust and safety.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here again at the Seed AI House. So trust and safety, the phrase trust and safety actually came from the late 90s at eBay when they were trying to think about a lot of the work they were doing around fraud and other things that were happening on the platform. And so they kind of came up with that moniker for their teams. And as Rachel mentioned, the work has definitely evolved a lot over the decades. It's starting to professionalize and even continue to change. But it really encompasses the work that these companies do, not only to write the policies of what's allowed or not allowed on the platform, the teams that actually then have to execute against those policies. So the content moderators, the operations teams, and there's product teams too that need to build the products to try to proactively detect some of this content, but also thinking about safety by design or other measures. You know, many of you might be familiar with some of the fact-checking work that various companies do, and so they need to build the labels that go on there, the dashboards for the fact checkers, all of those types of stuff. So pretty much at Meta, we called it, our teams were called integrity. At many other companies, they're trust and safety. Over the last couple of years, especially since post-2016, you really saw a lot of shift from these companies to thinking about not only mis and disinformation, but foreign interference, various election integrity type of problems. And you've started to see more trust and safety vendors and companies be created to create tools for startups and medium-sized companies who might not have the resources to have engineers and all those policy folks to better help them to build content moderation in from the beginning. You're seeing much more, there's the Trust and Safety Professionals Association, there's the Integrity Institute. You're seeing a professionalization of the industry and people who are in it. And with a lot of the layoffs that have happened that have definitely hit all parts of tech, but including trust and safety, you are now seeing a lot of those folks start to go into government, into civil society, into academia, into nonprofits to better help share some of the behind the scenes and nuance of how the different types of policies and guidelines and guardrails that folks would want these companies to have, to kind of talk about the nuances and some of the hard trade-offs that come with that. When you're now looking at it with AI, it's now adding whole new layers of trust and safety onto this. So traditionally, trust and safety has been very much kind of focused on the content that people are putting up. There's also been the behavior and also actors. But now with AI, it's not just trying to think about the safety of somebody trying to create a deep fake or anything like that, and that is something we need to talk about, but thinking about how these models are trained. How are the models trained? What type of data are they using? How do you think about making sure, if you've been following the Google Gemini stuff, which I think we'll get into a bit later, these tough questions of not only how the models are trained, but what you allow people to prompt them to do, and what is the guardrails and ethics and everything around how that content is then outputted to the user and what that looks like. And so it's still all, I want to say, a little bit new on that front of thinking about AI. And the last thing I'll just say though too is a lot of companies for a long time have been using AI to help do content moderation, to help proactively detect and find this. And there's, if you are following this, as many of you know, this is not great content that people are having to look at day in and day out, and it has a real effect on people's mental health. And so there's a lot of folks that are trying to look at how can we use AI and large language models to help particularly with the worst of the worst on the internet, so we don't necessarily have to subject humans to being looking at that and taking some of that down.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good segue into talking with Alyssa here, because I will say Alyssa has taught me a lot about the internet over the past decade, and in very, very helpful ways. And so there is a large diversity of people who are doing trust and safety within the internet, infrastructure and landscape. And Alyssa's boss was recently on a podcast, and I was like, oh, Alyssa, you're really into AI now. And we've been into AI for a decade. And so tell us what Cloudflare does, tell us how you're using AI, and what is your contribution into the trust and safety landscape?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me here. It's great to be here. And I'm glad that I could have taught you anything about the internet. So kudos for me in that sense. I didn't think that was possible. So if you don't know Cloudflare, it's worth understanding where we actually sit in the overall architecture of the internet. We are not a platform, so most people think about what's happening online. Well, what's happening on Facebook or what's happening on a large platform. We're actually at the infrastructure layer. So we do things like figure out how traffic gets delivered globally. We can sit in front of websites to protect them from cyber attacks. We can do a variety of different things that actually help things make it more secure, more reliable, and just better protected overall. Big global network, lots of things on us. So something like 20% of global websites sit on our network, which is a lot, and actually has a pretty big impact when it comes to trust and safety. So Katie was talking about what is trust and safety. Trust and safety for an entity like Cloudflare looks very, very different than trust and safety looks like at a platform like Meta. We don't have individual content moderators that are looking at individual posts. That's just not how we work. We're infrastructure. And so, but that doesn't mean that we don't get abuse complaints. That doesn't mean that we don't have potential obligations, legal obligations that come in from trust and safety around things like copyright or other obligations. It doesn't mean we don't have to think about things like malicious cyber activity that somebody might want to put on our own platform, right, on our platform. So we have to think about ways of addressing that. So when Rachel brought up the idea of AI, if you think about that from a volume standpoint, you have to find ways to identify things that look malicious and do them in sort of real time as quickly as you can. And so you can come up with a million different examples of that. We have it both on tools for customers. So think about how you identify the most horrific sort of content on the internet and things like child sexual abuse material. Again, as Katie said, nobody wants to look at that content. How do you find it effectively? How do you find it efficiently, and then get it removed as quickly as possible? Those are all great things for AI that you have to worry about. You also have to think about on the tool side. How can you adjust in real time as things come at you? And we see this on the cybersecurity side. There's sort of alignment there. So, basic phishing site, right? How do you identify it quickly? How do you identify a site that might look a lot like it? How do you adjust? Those are all things that are potential for, that have potential for AI where we've used it. And then again, just on the Cloudflare use of AI, we actually have AI that sits on our own platform. So because we have such a large network, we can do some of the distribution of an AI system. So imagine if you're sort of on the technical side, if you have a preset model, you want to be able to put it somewhere, right? So there are all these open source models for AI. You can actually build something on our network in a small way, and then have the inference, the sort of queries to it, globally distributed. So that means we have AI that sits on our network that we then have to think about from a trust and safety as well. How do we think about implementing policies if somebody does something bad with it? How do we put restrictions on it? How do we put things in front of it to make sure that people aren't doing bad things with it? So lots of different areas that we can cover.
Absolutely. And Ronaldo, who's with the Oversight Board, full disclosure, I used to work for Ronaldo for several years. But it's actually really interesting because we're here with CDAI. The Oversight Board sponsored CDAI, partnered with CDAI to talk about AI back in 2021. Yeah. And it is, I wasn't able to attend last year, but generative AI had just sort of come out and everyone's all of a sudden talking about AI all the time. And I think it's interesting from the Oversight Board perspective because one of your first cases was about automation and AI. And so the issues that you're working with at the Oversight Board aren't really new. I'm curious how you're thinking about them, how they may have shifted, and where you see AI fitting into this discussion.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's so good to be here with you today. I was here with CDAI last year as well, so it's great to be back. Great to be sharing the panel with you, Katie, Alyssa, so it's really good. For those of you who don't know the Oversight Board, I think might be interesting to hear what about it does. So the Oversight Board was created by Meta as an independent organization to make binding decisions in regards to content connected to Facebook, Instagram, and now Threads. So the independence, I think, is important to emphasize here. So I don't work for Meta. It's a separate entity. Meta has created a trust in which they put like irrevocable funds for the Oversight Board to do the work that it has to do in a long runway. And more importantly, I cannot be fired, sorry. But this is an important thing because I have terms in which I serve, terms of 3 years, and that gives us also a lot of independence to make decisions. So in other words, the decisions we make, they do not have to maximize shareholder profit on behalf of Meta. We have to look into other things, including human rights, principles and norms, Meta's terms of use, local context, and so on. And as you described, Rachel, our first case was actually about Brazil, where I'm from, and was in the city of São Paulo, where I live. And it was basically a content posted by a physician in Brazil in the campaign, the Pink October, to prevent breast cancer. So basically, he posted this picture of female breasts, and it was immediately taken down because of an error in terms of moderation using precisely AI. So our very first case was about that. I think at that very early moment, Meta didn't think that the Oversight Board was going to talk about algorithms and about automated moderation, but immediately we set up that particular topic as something that was very important for us. So we've been talking about it from our very beginning. We just made a decision very recently about a President Biden video that was altered using editing tools. It was not particularly AI, but the recommendations we made were all about AI, including the necessity of labeling content so that people get to know that you are in front of an altered video in front of you so that you make the best decision about how to take that content value. So this is a key topic. I think it became from something that started like almost accidentally now into a priority of what we do. And I think we are going to be talking about AI a lot in the next few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And our panel is called Generative AI, but I wanted to lay a foundation to talk about the fact that AI has been used in trust and safety for a long time. So let's talk just a little bit more about how generative AI has changed the work that you're doing, if it has at all. I'm happy to either start back with Ronaldo or anyone who wants to start that question.
All right. Okay. Well, I think generative AI has changed a lot in the past 12 months. I think everybody is in a mix of being really impressed by it and scared by it as well. So it's this mix between the two things, fear and excitement. And I think that that changes a lot, especially in regards to content moderation. Last year, I remember seeing some of the panels here at South by and people saying, oh, we don't need a content moderation anymore because AI is going to take care of all of it on behalf of us. And that's not really what happened in the past 12 months. So we actually saw the opposite. We've seen the emergence of very different generative models. So Grok, the Twitter/X model, it's really, interesting in a sense because it has a much, hard to describe it in English, but it basically teaches you how to make a bomb, and it uses slurs at you and that sort of thing. So my impression is that trust and safety is not really one of their main concerns. While if you look at OpenAI model, it has a lot more of guardrails. The Google Gemini case recently, I think maybe you saw it, the image generation part of it was basically aligned with creating a lot of ethnical diversity in its results, which I think it's great. But if you asked it to create an image of the founding fathers in the US, you would have like ethnicities that were not historically corresponding to the founding fathers at the time. And I think the Gemini case, it makes a very important lesson, which is AI actually can be controlled, can be aligned. I think the whole thing about the Google Gemini case is about that, because we are living in a lot of exaggerations also about AI, in which people say, no, this is alien technology, cannot be controlled. And the Google case shows us that it can be controlled. Maybe it cannot be fully controlled, but it can be aligned. Different models even have different editorial lines, if we can call it like that. And I think we should take that lesson very seriously. AI, as CDAI likes to say, is built by humans. It's software, so we have to remember that we can actually exercise control about those tools. And in my view, the Google case was excellent to show just that.
Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
Yeah. I've used, so I'll come at this from a couple angles. First is just, it's helped me to do my work.
Yeah.
So I have, because I'm a nerd, I have a database of every tech company announcement on elections going back to 1996. And it's got hundreds of rows and all of that. And the other day, I was like, oh, I want to compare how many announcements we're starting to see for 2024 compared to other election years. And so rather than me having to go and kind of Excel and kind of manually do that, I uploaded that to ChatGPT and I asked it to do that data analysis for me. And it spit it out in a couple seconds. I spot checked it to make sure that it was correct. And I've done that too with trying to find just different themes and data and stuff. So I've also used it just to help if I've got writer's block and I might be like, hey, write me a paragraph about this topic. And it's something that just kind of helps me to kind of just do my day-to-day job and stuff that I wouldn't normally, I'd have to spend a lot of time in which to do. And so I'm really excited about the image generation and the video and the possibilities for people to tell their stories that normally wouldn't be able to do so. But, so like Ronaldo was saying, this is why my mantra is panic responsibly, because there's that there's the excitement about it and there's the fear about it too. One of the ways this has been showing up in my consulting work through Duco is a lot of companies, and particularly the AI ones, some of you might have seen there was a elections accord signed at the Munich Security Conference a couple of weeks ago with 20 companies to outline their commitments around trying to build responsible AI with all of the elections happening this year. And with that is, and I've been talking to a lot of them, they're like, there's a need for human expertise still, of understanding how to think about, because elections are different in every country around the world. How do you think about, are you voting for candidates or are you voting for political parties? How do we think about, a lot of them are wanting to, they have to write these policies, but then they're also trying to think about, again, what prompts they should allow or not allow. So there's a lot of building that plane while it's in the air, because we can't stop elections from coming and looking at that. And so, and then there's just the other angle too of, I was just in California for 4 weeks, and like the conversations I had there just really started to crystallize in my brain just how much trust and safety is going to need to change in the age of AI, and how we need to be rethinking about how we approach this work, both in terms of how we can use AI, but how we need to think about those guardrails and stuff.
Go ahead.
So, yeah, I think they're really interesting pieces. I think one of the things that we think about are, there are two different categories, right? So there's the use of AI affirmatively for trust and safety issues that exist now. So that's just a tool set, right? Thinking about the world of AI and trust and safety, and what AI can potentially do for trust and safety and how it can change it. And then there's the question of trust and safety related to AI itself, right? So what goes into the model, what comes out of the model, what data training sets are there, how do we think about those things, how do you make sure that there's some integrity of with the content coming out, what's acceptable, what's not, what are the acceptable use policies. And I think we think about them slightly differently, and you have to sort of categorize them differently because they raise different sets of issues. So if you think about trust and safety, using tools for trust and safety, AI tools for trust and safety, it's been something that's been done a long time, but then you start to worry about making mistakes, right? So when does AI screw up in a content moderation decision, or when do how much do you automate in the world of trust and safety? That's a very different problem set from saying, how do I put controls on what this AI model does, or what information goes into it, and all of those things. And so I think I do think we want to bifurcate those a little bit. I think that the thing that generative AI did, going back to the sort of beginning of the question, is it just raised awareness that a lot of stuff was happening. It brought it to a public consciousness, and it made things available. And so what you've seen is that you've seen sort of people understanding that they can use AI to create problems, right? So this goes back to the idea of, if I want to do something malicious, and I want to build a phishing site because I want to do something malicious, AI can help me do that. AI can help me write a phishing email. That's a negative, right? So we have to think about that in that world of trust and safety as well. And I think the thing that AI did is, again, it made it more accessible. It made it easier to get to. It sort of democratized access to a bunch of things that are that we now have to think about the consequences for from an AI perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason I wasn't here last year was because I was actually in New Zealand working on the Christchurch call to action, and it was really interesting to be there talking about content moderation, particularly terrorist and violent extremist content moderation, when generative AI started really taking off, because it really does, as Alyssa was just saying, there are these, terrorists, violent extremists can now create lots more content, and they could potentially use generative AI to be very hyper-specific. And we'll talk about local context in just a second, but really targeting people, translating, making more graphic images that could really resonate with a local population. But on the other hand, tech companies are also able to use generative AI to create a lot more images that then they could take down. So one thing with the Christchurch shooting, the shooter had live streamed the attack, and it was taken down many times, but re-uploaded with small tweaks. And so how could you use AI to basically create every tweak possible? If you're going to snip out one sentence or second of every time, you could potentially use generative AI to make it much easier to detect and remove. But there still is important, and I think I've heard Alyssa's boss yesterday actually talking a lot about Russia and how he knew that the Russians were a big threat a long time ago because there is so much sketchy activity coming from Russia over the internet. But it is really about, and one of the things Katie does at Duco is helping get in this local expertise. So I'm curious, in a world where we're more connected and we've got generative AI, how does local context still matter? And how do you, make sure that as we're thinking about trust and safety and it is global, we're bringing in that local context? I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Katie, maybe
Yeah,
Ronaldo?
I can start. Yeah, I think that, and there's a lot of different ways of thinking about local context, right? There's cultural norms, there's language, and even like the case Ronaldo was talking about in Brazil, this is like one of the many of the big challenges at these companies, because in Brazil, showing a topless woman might be much more culturally acceptable than in the Middle East, for instance.
It used to be, a little less.
But see, I didn't necessarily know that, right? And that there was that change. And so working with companies, because it's not just American, they're not just American engineers at these companies, they're from all around the globe. But having that local expertise and being able to know when those nuances shift. Or, a lot of times bad actors will start to adopt seemingly innocuous symbols like a teddy bear, for instance. And depending upon the context you're seeing that teddy bear, it could be just really mean a teddy bear, or it could be a signal of child trafficking or something like that, and go to this site to get more. And so you need that human local expertise to be able to help the companies understand how to be tweaking the models and thinking about that. But I do think also on the flip side to what you were saying with the video, the AI models can also help think through all those potential options to help it train faster. Because that's been one of the biggest challenges, is when these actors are trying to get around these loopholes, or trying to get around these policies, it can take a while for the classifiers and the AI to learn to then be able to go and detect. And that was an issue with the Christchurch video, because it was just near impossible to be able to find it all because of those little tweaks. So that's why I think we try to bring in folks from all over the globe to try to help provide some of that nuance that you really need to have.
And that's what the board is helping do as well, right?
Yeah. Basically, for the board, our approach is, first, we are open to public comments, and we are open to public inputs, which I think is one of the key things of what we do. So having the participation of people local and basically providing context, that's very important. Second thing is we work with local providers, including Duco, in order to understand what's going on in a particular context. So we had cases in Turkey, in Ethiopia, Colombia, Cuba, Brazil, Israel, Gaza, Haiti. We had Russia, Ukraine. So as you can imagine, these are completely different contexts. And understanding what is going on locally is absolutely fundamental. And this is actually one of the key things about having an oversight board. I see a lot of debates about how AI should be regulated. There's people calling for building an international agency similar to the Nuclear International Agency to regulate AI. But what we see happening right now is basically different countries taking different approaches. Europe leading the way with the AI Act. But if we leave the regulation for each individual country, we also miss these global nuances. We miss that there is a systems problem. And when I see what the oversight board does, is pretty much to look into that, is to take the AI problem not as a national problem only, but also as a sort of a global problem in which people have to understand that many of these harms, they are not specific from one region, but it can be a harm that the negative externalities affect people everywhere. So I like that approach. I don't think AI is going to have an international body similar to the UN. I think the chances of that happening are near zero. But I do think that AI might have an oversight board, just like the one that I am a part of. And of course, I'm invested in the success of this experiment. And I actually think this experiment can actually show an interesting way that can be effective and binding in terms of how we approach AI regulation.
Absolutely. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, you know, the one thing I would add, I think the really interesting pieces, I think the one thing I would add to it is, if you think about how AI models work, one of the things that's kind of amazing about them is that you can actually create a model that has a default set of rules, and then you can train it on a particular data sets that might be more localized. So I think there is actually there's actually long-term potential. If you think about what it actually means to have local context, it's really hard for most companies to figure out what the local context is in every country in which the internet might be available, right? It's not. So if you imagine you have a service and you're not enormous from a company standpoint. What does that actually look like? The ability for AI to help solve some of that gap, not complete it. You'll never solve it completely, I think, to Katie's point earlier, but helping bridge some of that gap, helping bring in some local context because it is trained on local data. Again, with a default set of rules, there's a lot of potential to think about in the world of AI. Again, I see that as more on the sort of tool set side of the world, not on you still need those set of baseline rules.
And can I add one other thing? Because Alyssa, something you said made me reminded me of something. I can't believe I hadn't thought about this, but Ben Thompson, who writes a newsletter called Stratechery, wrote something the other day about when you put a prompt into any of these AI tools, oftentimes they're kind of rewriting them on the back end. And one of the things Ben was talking about is, should we have personalized AI outputs? So that what Ronaldo might get with his, everything that Meta or somebody might know about him would be okay in the Brazilian context. But again, if I do it in America or another country, and the question is, should we do that? For me, I was like, oh my God, that's a whole other angle on the trust and safety side I haven't thought about doing, where again, there's like pros and cons and thinking about that. But that is something we're gonna have to grapple with, of thinking about, again, because globally there aren't, as much as the tech companies would love to have one standard set of rules for around the globe, it's just not realistic in terms of how our world works. And so we need to be having some of these tough conversations early on here on thinking about that.
I have more questions, but I wanted to add another very interesting story around what you need, could you have a personalized model for, I'm gonna out this person. I was talking to a staffer for Senator Ted Cruz, who used to put talking point, the House or the Senate floor talking points into ChatGPT and say, write a speech in the style of Ted Cruz. Because there's so much that the ChatGPT could. Apparently now, ChatGPT will no longer write in the style of Ted Cruz because it has become more politically sensitive, which I think, maybe he could come in and say, I work for Ted Cruz, I'm not being politically insensitive. Can I have my speech about Ted Cruz
these
style
offices will be creating, if I were at a campaign, I'd be creating a custom large language model off of everything my candidate or boss has ever uttered, because then it's a very specific data set to what they have said and written, and then your comms person can very easily create all those things that they need, at least be a starting point.
But then take the trust and safety side of that and think about what that looks like for somebody who could abuse it, right? And so this is the world of trust and safety. You look at that and you're like, now you want to pretend like you're Ted Cruz. You want something in his voice with his image. The world of what you can do with that is really challenging. And I think this is going back to the regulatory point. We haven't actually figured out what those rules are yet. And so there aren't a lot of rules on the trust and safety side. And I think what you see are companies trying to figure them out. So it's a perfect example because it's so useful if you're a staffer for Ted Cruz, and it could be so dangerous if you are abusing it, right?
And we, on Thursday, the President's State of the Union address, he talked about, I think there's only 2 references to AI. One was we should promote it or whatever, and then the other one was we need to ban AI voice impersonations. I'm like, okay, it seems like a weird thing to throw in there. And I said, ban voice impersonations and more. there's a lot that could be in that and more.
Those two words are carrying a lot.
Yes, yes. But this a little bit leads me into a discussion that I want to have around elections. Katie, you are the elections expert. We can't even scratch the surface with all of Katie's elections knowledge. How are you feeling about 2024? How is generative AI going to impact these elections, and what can the trust and safety folks do about it?
So for those of you who might not be following this as closely, this is an unprecedented year of elections. It's the first time ever that in the same year as the US presidential, we've already had elections in places like Taiwan, Indonesia, Belarus. I think Portugal had an election, and Ireland had 2 referendums this weekend as well. We've also got Mexico coming up, the European Parliament. UK will likely be going to elections.
Argentina,
yeah, but and there's a lot of local elections too. So Brazil, that's just national level. Yeah. Brazil, Turkey is going to have local elections. Yep. According to The Economist, over 4 billion people are going to be impacted by elections in some way, shape, or form this year. And when I first realized this and started telling anybody that would listen to me about how big of a year this was,
just me.
5 years ago.
I'll listen, Katie.
I mean, companies were working on AI, but like where it is today just was not even on the, even on my radar screen of where it would be. And so this is one of those, I kind of liken it to what Obama using social media in 2008, of how we're seeing, because we're certainly seeing examples of AI being used in a variety of formats. In Indonesia, the campaigns were using it to create cartoon versions of themselves. They had chatbots that were talking to the voters and stuff like that. In Pakistan, there was a super interesting case where Amir Khan, one of the opposition voices, he's jailed. He did an authorized AI video. He labeled it. He did everything that I think a lot of people would say, like to try to make it transparent about what he was doing, but he used that to create an AI video declaring victory in the election, even though he didn't actually film it. And so, again, this is where my panic responsibly line kind of comes in, because I think that it's really, really good that we are having these conversations about AI and how we mitigate the harms as early as we are, and we didn't do that with social media, and I think that's a lesson learned from that. But the other thing I am worried about is the narrative around AI and how we separate out the signal from the noise of what AI could do versus what it's actually doing and what the impact is. And so I would just, I try to caution everybody of kind of when we're hearing these stories and thinking about that, we should be talking about it, but let's also be realistic about what is happening. And you don't need AI for there to still be problems. Their mis and disinfo still happens. Ronaldo talked about a case with President Biden. That was an edited piece of video. It wasn't even AI. Yeah. We've had Photoshop forever. So we need to, I think, we've worked our way through these technologies before, but the hard part is that it's all kind of happening while also these elections are happening. So we just need to be vigilant about kind of thinking about and flexible and thinking about and moving quickly.
And Ronaldo, Alyssa, go ahead.
Yeah, just to tell a little bit what we did in the Biden case, right? So the Biden case, it was a video that was edited with very cheap editing tools, so it's not a deep fake, it's a cheap fake. And in that sense, it was making Biden do something inappropriate or appearing to do something inappropriate with his nephew. And granddaughter. Yes, and granddaughter, yeah, good. And basically, what we did in terms of recommendation to Meta is, first, no distinction between deep fakes and cheap fakes. Both can be harmful, so both has to be taken seriously. Second thing, labeling. Like users have the right to know that that particular piece of content was edited. And interestingly, 2 days after we make the decision, Meta came publicly and said that they are going to adopt labeling. And I think 1 day after, OpenAI said the same thing. So I think that's a good thing because it gives the user more information about that piece of content. And it's a way that you don't have to take sometimes the content down. So it's a way of fighting disinformation with more information instead of less. And I like that a lot. Other thing, the Meta policies, they were just about using AI to make people say something that they didn't said. And we actually recommended Meta to change that into also including making people do something that they didn't do. So we made all these recommendations. This is just a sum up. And I think so far, Meta has responded to them very seriously. And I think this is just the beginning. Of course, this is not going to solve all the problems, but I think especially labeling and accounting for the types of attacks that you can actually have using AI, I think that's already a good first step.
And I'll have Alyssa answer, and then we'll take a few questions from the audience, so go ahead.
Yeah, you know, I think when we get into the election space, I think one of the things that actually comes up a fair amount, again, is the speed that things can be created. That is the difference with AI. Things can happen really quickly. And when you work a lot in elections, what you realize is that the sort of core piece of elections is trust in certain things. And so, you know, if nobody thinks information is valid, if no one thinks the vote is right, if everyone thinks that it must be you know, fake news, for lack of a better term, then you actually don't have an election anymore. And so I think that when you get into this world of what does it mean for elections, it's trying to find a way to continue to build trust in elections while recognizing that you have to navigate things like deepfakes, right? So how do you deal with that? How do you find responsible sources of information? How do you find things that are actually legitimately reliable? That's a lot of what has to happen now. It's not necessarily, you're never, you know, the world of AI means that you're never going to be able to find all of the fake content, right? You're just not. It's not so practically. So we have to find ways to sort of amplify the things that are correct, that are legitimate, everyone agrees are legitimate sources of information, and kind of work through it that way. That's, again, as Katie said, that's the same problem we've been dealing with. It's just happening kind of at an exponential volume where things are happening. It's sort of been gasoline poured onto a fire.
Any questions from the audience? Somebody right there.
Hi there. My name's Kat Casey. In an age of Sora and powerful text-to-video AI, and with the understanding that you only have to be 60 or 70% believable as an image, what's your recommendation for folks going into the next 9 months of the election year in terms of validating these evidence sources for themselves? There's not tools and technology yet, and I don't know, looking at the output, it's very, very persuasive and very realistic.
Yeah, I can just share a little bit, also kind of my own personal, how I've been trying to think about this and make recommendations. I think one, just more broadly, I think everybody should do a little inventory of your own information diet, thinking about, like, are you making sure that, like, if you want to get diverse news sources, are you, like, for me, I want to make sure I'm getting diverse news sources across the ideological spectrum, but also globally, and also from civil society to the tech world. And so I want to make sure that the newsletters I get, the things I'm following on Twitter or Threads or whatever it is, that I'm getting that and kind of looking at that. I've had to do this a lot with my parents, of sort of like, if they see something like that, or there's these stories of being like looking for those indicators, right? Of like the date, is there an author, but also just doing some searches and other things to try to find if there's other stories that can back up what you might be seeing in, you know, being generated as part of that. And I think there's going to be a component of that's why I think the labeling is important, but it's a first step in it. It's not the only step of thinking about it. The one thing that I am particularly worried about for this election cycle is deepfake audio down ballot. Because I think that anything that's made about like Trump or Biden or, you know, Taylor Swift, it's going to be debunked pretty quickly. But with
Is Taylor Swift running for president?
Not yet. That wasn't an
Katie
announcement.
may have made an announcement about Taylor Swift.
But with less local journalism, the capacity of fact checkers is already at capacity. There could be opportunities there that people might try to meddle in some of that. And so for, you know, I think campaigns and others need to be having plans about how to potentially counter that. But there was an interesting fireside chat I did with Sasha Eisenberg on Friday. He has a new book out called Lie Detectives, and looking at how campaigns try to combat mis and disinfo. And one of the things he said, though, too, is like, what was just as important of thinking about how to respond was to know when not to respond. So not to amplify the story and everything like that. So I'm sorry, I was a little all over the place there, but those are just a couple of the things that I would recommend. Any closing thoughts, Ronaldo, Alyssa?
Very quickly,
Yeah.
two things. First, we are going to take a case about nudity created with AI. I think we had some high-profile cases going on recently. I can't say much about it yet, but I think it's something that are worrying from pop stars to moms and paps everywhere. It's really a serious thing, and we are going to take a case about that. Second thing is, I also worry about subtle attacks, because I think when you make AI to get people to do things that are, completely out of sense, it's easy to identify. But I worry about subtle, small attacks in which you make some person, for instance, appear older than they are, or appear to be more sick than they really are, or they cannot coordinate their thoughts well. And these subtle attacks, they can be just like 1 second of a video, and in the aggregate, the damage can be really hard. So one thing that at the Oversight Board we've been doing is precisely to try and understand what is the impact of these aggregate attacks that are very small on their own, but in the aggregate they cause a lot of harm. And I think in the AI sector, we have to be aware of that and be cautious about them too.
Yeah, no, I think in the election, I'm going to go back to the election space. So Cloudflare has actually done a bunch of cybersecurity protection in the election space. And so I want to sort of go back to the point that there is a positive use case for AI in some cases. So the ability to do, to help protect candidates' websites from potential other things that might be problems. We can't think of AI in elections as always a negative. I think we've done a lot of things that actually have affirmatively used AI in positive ways to help protect candidates, to help protect state and local governments and election sites, making sure there are those valuable sources of information that we all agree are correct. So there, everything is, as with most things, it's sort of a mixed story, and we'll have to navigate it as we go forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much.